Okay, good morning everybody. Today we'll be looking at flight trends and search trends, booking trends into the Middle East region, looking at data from the beginning of the year all the way through to the end of year, giving some trends and insights around those. So yeah, happy to start off. If you go over to the next slide, please. Okay, so in reference to flight search and booking trends, that we're seeing over here. At the end of Q3, we see flight searches into in 2022 compared to the same period in 2021 are up on a regional and international and domestic level. Flights set to depart in October 2022 are up 40% year on year, and in total 20% on a regional level and 118% on an international level, and up 39% on a domestic level. So really positive numbers overall, and it kind of demonstrates the strong travel intent to the region that we are seeing through our own Sojern data, and we only expect that to increase as we get through to the end of the year with the World Cup coming up in Qatar. So next slide, please. Yeah, so looking at Middle East search and book to travel lead time in the last 30 days. In 2021, we saw that nearly 40% of flight searches and bookings were made within 7 days of traveling. And we see a similar picture in 2022 at 39.2%. We've also highlighted a slight increase in searches and bookings made in the next 1 to 2 months, and more in 3 months ahead, increasing from 13 to 15% and 5 to 8% respectively. This is likely due to the Middle East being a more stable position post-pandemic than it was a year ago, and travelers there have more increased confidence in securing flights in a more timely fashion. The imminent start of the World Cup in November will also have an impact on these lead times and figures, with travelers looking to secure flights ahead of time. And also think just in general, the increased cost of flights would also be a major factor in this as people are looking to book in advance. So next slide, please. Yeah, in 2021, the average trip duration to the Middle East based on flight searches was 4 to 7 days at 31%, which remains in 2022, although being a bit slightly higher at 33%. This is good for destination marketing organizations in that travelers are spending more time in destinations and more money in respective destinations, especially also those traveling in the region throughout the World Cup tournament and looking to extend their days, right? So we'll get into those stats in a little bit, but essentially what that means, I mean, there's a good opportunity for destination marketing organizations across the region to kind of leverage the increased visitor numbers into the region towards the end of the year. So not just people going in and out of Qatar, but also staying in some countries around the region for a longer period of time. Cool. Next slide, please. So yeah, in the next couple of slides, we'll go through kind of hotel search trends. Search and booking trends we're seeing within the region. So here you'll see a comparison between 2021 and 2022. At the end of Q3, you'll see Dubai. In 2021, you'll see Dubai was the most popular destination for travel within the Middle East. But now Riyadh has kind of moved up from 5th place to first place with 5% of the total hotel searches and bookings. This demonstrates, again, domestic travelers are generally choosing regional travel over international destinations, where in 2022, you'll see Dubai, Kuwait, Jordan, all in the top 5, followed by New York. But also what is interesting here potentially too is also related to price, right? So it's obviously become a lot more expensive to travel to further and away destinations now. So people are looking for a closer alternative, and that's kind of around kind of why we've seen probably more domestic or regional destinations appearing higher up in the list compared to more international destinations in 2021. And also, I would say post-pandemic safety, right? So I think within the region, it's done a really good job coming out of COVID-19 to get their cities and destinations ready for the rebound. Cool, so next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, we look at kind of hotel searches to Saudi, and here we see Riyadh being the top destination metro and aligned with Sojern's latest data, which shows that international hotels to Saudi Arabia have increased by a whopping 472% compared to the beginning of the year. So a huge increase there. And the recent surge in searches could be attributed to both Saudi National Day, with a public holiday falling on the 22nd of September, as well as interest around the World Cup tournament, which we'll go into in a couple of slides. So it just shows like the big influence like big national holidays like Saudi national holidays do have on travel intent and bookings for certain times of the year. And I think probably there's a big difference, right, between Saudi National Day last year and this year on how open the country is and how more relatively easy it is to visit into Saudi, and Saudi's going home for these kind of holidays. So next slide, please. Yeah, so looking at Middle East search and book to travel lead times over the last 30 days. In 2021, we saw that 48% of hotel searches and bookings were made within 7 days of traveling, which has dropped off down a little bit to 37% in 2022. As with the flights, though, we've also seen an increase in hotel searches and bookings made in the next 1 to 2 months, and more than 3 months in advance. So this has increased from 16 to 27%. And 8 to 11% respectively, with hotels in the region still going at a pretty high ADR and longer lead times, maybe just due to travelers seeking to secure more favorable rates, right? So the thinking and logic is that further in advance you book, the better and more competitive the rates are, right? So I think that's changed from years gone by when people were waiting to the last minute to book, and sometimes they would get a better rate. Now with hotels being pretty full again, the longer period of booking is starting to make sense. Cool, next slide, please. Yeah, so looking at Middle East trip durations in the last 30 days, here again we see a different trend in 2022. The average trip duration based on hotel searches was 1 to 2 days at 40%. This has shifted to slightly longer, 2 to 3 days, which is compromising as 39%. So yeah, that could be down to numerous reasons. That could be a lot of business travel coming back potentially. There's also a lot of kind of the leisure travel. So when people are maybe extending a 1-day trip into a specific city within the region, and extending that onto a weekend or a couple of days holiday, and then people just being more comfortable in traveling in general. So there's a few different factors at play there, but it's encouraging to see that trip durations are starting to extend out a little bit further. Cool, next slide, please. Cool, so in the next couple of slides, we'll just touch on some of the World Cup Qatar data that we have been seeing. I mean, just as reference, we've been tracking this data from the beginning of the year, so there will be some kind of reference points back to kind of previous data points we have seen. But yeah, I mean, we'll go through that in a little bit detail now. So yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, so here you can see the flight booking trends into Qatar across different regions that we are seeing around the world. So you can see like it's based on kind of where the region, based on where the World Cup teams will be coming from. Obviously, there's a representation of all different countries and regions around the world, hence the World Cup. But you can see some of the bigger footballing nations and the regions and continents that they're in. You'll see the trends improving here, and then you obviously see the Middle East, which is the closest destination to Qatar, or closest region to Qatar, obviously seeing the biggest increase. So if you look at in a more granular basis, since the beginning of 2022, flight bookings for November to December to date across the globe are increasing to Qatar, obviously, as I just touched on, with the spikes in intent roughly aligned with the waves of World Cup ticket releases. So the Middle East is the highest bookings into Qatar to date, and it's almost a 5,000% higher increase compared to January 2022 levels, right? So we're seeing massive increases in demand across the board, but Middle East being the highest one. Since the latest data we shared in July, booking data from Africa for the first time has surpassed the number of bookings coming from the United States. So we are seeing a lot of intent and bookings coming through from African nations, and it is mostly, I believe, North African nations now, as they are starting to firm their plans up to come and support their teams around the World Cup. Europe has the second largest bookings to Qatar, over 350% up compared to January 2022 levels. APAC is third, but also with a huge proportional increase of 5,000%, while the US now ranks at fourth with an increase of 434%. Africa's growth, as I touched on earlier, is very high. It's 3,500% higher than January 2022. And these, as I touched on, mostly from North Africa, the likes of Morocco and Egypt, etc., where their teams now competing in the World Cup. So, I mean, overall message is we are seeing huge demand now with flight bookings coming into Qatar during that time. And we'll probably still continue to see that, I would say, over the next month or two until everyone is kind of fully got their travel booked for the World Cup. Cool, next slide, please. Yeah, so this is taking a more granular look into flight bookings to the GCC, right? So the thinking behind this is that it's not only Qatar that is really going to benefit from the World Cup, but it's also the surrounding countries, right? So if we're looking at United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and Jordan, Bahrain, etc. So countries that are pretty close to Qatar, but will also benefit from people potentially staying and locating themselves in those countries for the duration of the World Cup and just shuttling over to Qatar, or people who would still go to Qatar but then would have extended stays, for example, in these countries. So if you look into the data on the sheet, so all flight bookings to GCC are up for November to December 2022 with travel to the World Cup. And as I mentioned, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Bahrain, and UAE are also having significant year-on-year increases. And that would kind of be the trend we expect as we still continue into the next couple of months, as more and more people do start firming up their travel plans and do start to book and to instead of and put more research into what they're going to do and how their World Cup trip pans out. So yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, so as of our latest data, the UAE, if you look at the proportion of tickets going into Qatar, is ranked on the highest. So it's at 17% and is a top country traveling to the World Cup. If you look at that in comparison to July 2022, so earlier on in the year, when we look at the bookings, US and UK went up by one spot to second and third respectively in August, while bookings from India have dropped off a little bit. If we look at Australia, that is now down to 10th spot, but if we look back in August, that was in 6th spot. So there's also a theory behind it that the further away the country is from Qatar, the more in advance these countries tend to book, right? So if you look at South America, you look at the US, you look at Australia, I would say a lot of those people have already booked their tickets in advance, so that hence why they're potentially dropping off a bit, and we are seeing more demand from like Middle East and Europe and Asia. But then looking at Kuwait, Egypt, and Lebanon, the increase in their rankings are now in the top 10, right? So there's a lot of interest coming from those countries too. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of it, I think. I mean, if there's a next slide potentially, or is that it? I think that might be it. But I mean, just some more general insights into kind of the World Cup and what we're seeing. I mean, looking at the busiest outbound travel from the UAE to Qatar, the tournament, and we're seeing the biggest lift is the lead up to the first match, and that's being played on the 21st of November. And we expect the first couple of weeks to be the busiest weeks. Obviously, that's when all the countries are involved, and there's up to 2 or 3 games, sometimes more, I think, on a single day. But then after it gets into the knockout stages, obviously the demand becomes a bit less as countries and teams get eliminated as the tournament progresses. But yeah, we still definitely expect the spillover effect after the teams are being knocked out in other regions, in other countries around the region. So yeah, lots of interesting facts there to go on. And I think it is also, I mean, the Middle East is setting itself up in a pretty strong place for this when it comes to kind of hosting the World Cup, although it is being hosted in Qatar. The Middle East in general is doing a great job in putting on kind of shuttle flights in and out of Qatar during the World Cup. I know Fly Dubai for Air Arabia, for example, are doing a good job within the UAE in doing that. So we do expect Sharjah and Dubai and even Abu Dhabi obviously to benefit from the ripple effects of that as people decide to base themselves here and just travel in and out, as well as obviously a lot of UAE's residents who will be going in and traveling in to watch the matches on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, that's kind of it from our point of view on the World Cup. I mean, I think key takeout is obviously it has been a very strong year to date for the UAE and Middle East in general. As kind of people do start to travel again, a lot of international people coming into the region, as we saw in one of the earlier slides when international travel was up over 110%. So really positive news there. And we do expect the rest of the year to be really strong too, right? Obviously fueled by the World Cup and the demand, which is going to be around that, obviously in Qatar, but then also across the different regions. And I think there's a great opportunity for DMOs and national tourists also obviously take advantage of that and try and get people to extend their stays by highlighting all the great offerings there are to do in surrounding countries, right? Whether it be culture, heritage, attractions, etc. So really exciting times for the region, and I look forward to connecting towards the end of the year when we can report on some of these fantastic trends we're seeing. Thank you very much.